So Justine Bret has been a staff conference interpreter at the Translation Bureau. Translation Bureau is part of the federal government of Canada, for those of you who are outside of Canada, since 2002, and was a senior interpreter at the conference interpretation section from 2011 to 2017. She has taught consecutive and simultaneous interpretation at the Master in Conference Interpretation of the University of Ottawa. She is the chief interpreter of the Translation Bureau since 2021. She holds a master's degree in conference interpretation from the University of Ottawa. Justine and her team at the Translation Bureau has been doing extensive amount of work in regards to safety and interpreters protocols. So welcome, Justine.
Thank you, Lola. Thank you very much for having me. This is a very impressive audience that we have today. So, Lola, I'm always very impressed with your involvement with the profession and your numerous hats. Congratulations on your nomination that I received notice of today as on the advisory, as chair of the advisory board of the Canadian Language Industry Association. And, thank you for having me again on the same subject, I might add. And, thank you for your energy and your initiative in organizing these great sessions. So from the outset, I'm very pleased to be here, but I am not a health and safety expert by any means. My expertise is really conference interpreting and managing conference interpreters. And this is what I will be talking about today, our experience in the last years with the challenges and the progress we've made regarding those challenges of working almost fully in remote simultaneous interpretation, and then moving on to the hybrid setting. So I'm going to talk about, how it happened for us and the challenges that it created and how we were able to mitigate or overcome some of them. So I'm the director of interpretation at the Translation Bureau, and as Lola said, it's a federal organization. We're part of the Public Services and Procurement Canada. It's a federal department here in Canada. And the Translation Bureau, actually, I do have a presentation if you just give me a few seconds. Here it is, I think. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Lola. Okay. So there we go. Do you see the new slide now? I'm just checking that it works. Yes. Okay. So this is the Translation Bureau, basically, and we provide linguistic services to federal departments and also to Parliament, our priority client, really. I have about a team of about 70 interpreters. 60 approximately work in French, English, official languages here in Canada. And our team of staffers work exclusively for Parliament, and we hire freelancers to work for federal departments. That we had to restructure about 5 years ago because of our priority client, because of our capacity issues. So we provide translation, terminology, and interpretation, and my focus and my expertise is really interpretation. And our service model here at the Bureau in interpretation is a bit different from other organizations who use or who hire interpreters, because we are only responsible for providing interpretation services when required. We have no expertise in audiovisual support or audiovisual infrastructure and IT infrastructure as well, which, as you can imagine, puts us in a difficult situation in a world that is so integrated, especially with RSI in the recent years. We can only try to influence the IT environment, but we don't have any control over it. So like many, the Translation Bureau was exposed to remote simultaneous interpretation before the pandemic, but a few months into the pandemic, the Parliament moved to fully virtual meetings. It took them a little while to get organized, and then they choose Zoom as their video conferencing platform. The Bureau was not involved in this decision. That was the administration that was responsible for this. So, our interpreters rose up to the challenge, answered the call, and they worked for about, I would say, a year, maybe a year and a half, in a configuration where they were working on site in the Parliament buildings with a small team of support staff, but all parliamentarians, senators, and members of Parliament, as well as all witnesses, were fully virtual. So the interpreters were the only ones on site, and everybody else was virtual. And the sound of the video conferencing room, or rather the sound of the video conferencing system, the Zoom sound, was patched into the in-house system. And that's a very specific configuration that I don't think was very widespread. And our staff and freelancers worked in this configuration for quite a while, about more than a year. And so before the pandemic, I would say probably 2025 our participants of our work was remote. When participants were participating remotely, it was usually by telephone. The sound was usually very bad. And we didn't have the visual of participants, so it wasn't ideal. And then after we had this time of about a year where everybody was remote, but the interpreters, at least we had the visual of participants, but there was a big variety of sound quality because people weren't using microphones. The internet connectivity was very variable, and so it was a bit chaotic, and it took us a while to adapt to this situation and to improve things. But at the time, everybody was trying to figure out how to do this and do this properly, and we had no way to imagine that it would last for so long. Today, things have improved. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we did to improve the situation and the working conditions for our team. And I would say now about 25% of our work is from remote speakers. That's an average because, the Senate chamber, for instance, decided to require senators to be on site. So the Senate proceedings are fully in person. But in general, witnesses still are able to appear remotely to committee meetings. Obviously, that has created a lot of opportunities and savings, and so I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So we sort of have to adapt to that I can't say it's new anymore, but we have to adapt to that reality and make sure that our staff and freelancers are well protected in this environment. So this is my next slide. You may have heard, because there was quite a bit of a media coverage on this, but our staff and our freelancers were collateral victims of the hybrid parliament. We've realized about probably a year or maybe a few months into this configuration of the interpreters working on site and everybody else being remote, that we were trying to understand why the sound quality was so poor as perceived by the interpreters. We were trying to understand, and we asked the National Research Council to come in and help us understand, the sound that we were getting. And that's when we found out that interpreters were getting very shorter frequency range of sound, and it was not adequate, and it didn't meet the ISO standard on frequency range. And we were told that this was because of the Zoom connector between the in-person infrastructure and the remote virtual meeting room. So this was fixed, but I can't say that for I say about a year rather, our interpreters were working in this configuration, and I think this is probably one of the reasons why we've seen all of those symptoms and those reports that I'm going to talk about. So you see the quote that is from a parliamentary committee report specifically on the health of interpreters, because we were witnessing, we were seeing the impacts of this on our staff and trying to understand how we can support them and how we can improve things. So since 2020, our staff filed an increasing number of incident reports. Before the pandemic, we would have probably 20 incident reports, and then in 2020, we started getting around 100 of those reports. They were not necessarily linked to an acoustic incident, but they were rather coming from extended exposure, cumulative exposure to this sound, the compressed sound. Although we don't really know if it's the compression or what it is that would that has this impact, but those reports came in, and they didn't necessarily lead to what they called in health and safety incapacitating injury, so medical leave following those incident reports. But we did have a few staff who had to take medical leave and who had to go see their health professional and maybe get accommodated duties, shorter working hours, or fewer working days during the week because they had those long-lasting symptoms. So the most common were tinnitus, which is ringing in the ear, hyperacusis, pain in the ear, fatigue, headache, nausea, hearing loss. I'd say that hearing loss is not the most common symptom, and that's a very good thing. But hyperacusis and tinnitus are common among the people who do have those symptoms. And what's very interesting is that people react very differently to this sound, and so some interpreters have been completely unaffected by RSI and by this new configuration over the last few years, but some have had those symptoms and therefore file those reports. We don't have as much information on freelancers because they don't file reports and they're not our staff, but we know that this is something that is happening in the industry, not only here at the Translation Bureau. So we hired the National Research Council. We did a study on sound, as I said, in 2021. That's when we found out about the frequency range. We were able to work with the parliamentary, the House administration, who's responsible for all of the IT and AV infrastructure on the Hill for Parliament. We were able to work with them to fix that problem, and we were able to test recently and see that the frequency range is now compliant with the ISO standard. And we were able to work on several other fronts as well. I do want to say, though, about acoustic shock that we had we had 2 incidents involving freelancers who were exposed to acoustic shock. So we think that obviously because the interpreters have their headsets on, sometimes they put the volume very high because they feel like they can't hear the participants properly when they're not using proper microphone, or when the sound is distorted or the internet connection is not good. That makes them very vulnerable to those, increased sounds. And we've had 2 freelancers who were injured in the last year. They are feeling better now, but this is something that is very concerning to us. And even though there are interpretation consoles that are mandatory for if you want to work with the Bureau as a client, and obviously everywhere at Parliament, you are required to use those ISO compliant consoles that have integrated limiter. So this was a way for us to prevent those incidents. But now that people are increasingly sensitive to sound, those who do have those symptoms and who have hyperacusis, for instance, they may be injured even at a lower sound level than the one that is covered by that is triggered by the limiter compressor. So that is one of the explanations. But we're very aware of this, and we're being very careful to eliminate that risk. And the last thing that's a bit gloomy, but my presentation is going to get a bit more positive in the next slide. I just want to be very honest about what we've been through, and then I'm going to talk about what we did to support our staff and protect them in this situation. The last thing that I want to say is mental health, because again, I'm not a psychologist, but I do want to say that I think the pandemic has, created a lot of anxiety people, I didn't talk about the measures that we took to protect our staff or freelancers from from COVID, but obviously, like any organizations, we took measures to protect them, and we didn't have an outbreak among our staff or freelancers, so that's a very good thing. But I think it has really triggered a lot of anxiety on basically everybody, not only interpreters. And interpretation is already a stressful job. And I think also working in an environment now where people are concerned because they see their colleagues who are having, hearing issues or hearing health problems. There's also the acoustic incidents. I think people are increasingly anxious, and we don't have a lot of studies on the impact of toxics, or as we call it. I don't really know what that means, but the impact of digitalized or processed sound on hearing. But we do know that stress definitely can trigger those symptoms. So people who already have had an acoustic shock, they may feel pain at just thinking about going back in the booth, for instance, because of the stress that it creates. So I think one should not undermine the impact of stress on hearing health as well. On general health, obviously, but also on hearing health. And this is something that I've witnessed with my team in the last few years. So the last slide, how am I doing in terms of time? Okay, so now I'm going to talk about what we did in this situation, how the Bureau reacted, and how we tried to support our staff and improve working conditions in general. So the first thing that we did, as soon as we worked fully virtually in this new environment, because we had never worked with Zoom before, it was fairly new. We shortened working days. We used to work 6 hours a day, and now interpreters, and still to this day, are working 4 hours a day. We're trying to move now back to trying to increase working hours now that we've made quite a bit of progress on the working conditions. We've offered our freelancers the possibility to bid on a 6-hour day or a 4-hour day, because we have to be flexible. As I mentioned before, I think the people, it's very variable, the impact of this situation on people, and we want to be flexible, because we realize that not everybody, like one solution won't work for everybody. We've reduced working hours, as I said, and then we've been working very hard trying to get more data. There is very little science at the moment on the impact of this new environment on people, and not only interpreters. So we've hired the National Research Council here in Canada to try to understand what kind of sound the interpreters are getting, what kind of impact it can have, what defines good quality sound, and very recently we've analyzed, as I said, the frequency range, the sound pressure level that interpreters are exposed to. We've determined that the frequency is now compliant with ISO, that the sound pressure levels are not dangerous. So that's a good conclusion, but there is still a lot of work to do. We're also working on a project study with the University of Ottawa on hearing health of our interpreters. So it's a longitudinal study on the hearing health of our interpreters. Our staff get one very specific hearing evaluation every year, and all of the equipment is calibrated the same way, so we are able to benchmark, and we have aggregated data on the overall hearing health of our team, and we're also able to compare 1 year year over year. We are at the second year now of our study. Our staff is going to take the second evaluation, but we don't have the final report of the first year yet. It is coming very soon. We also did a benchmarking study with CSA Research with other organizations employing interpreters to try to see how we fare and if they're doing things differently, and if it has better impact, and if they have better solutions, and to help us guide our decisions. We were able to make microphones mandatory for government departments in March of 2021. It took us a little bit longer for Parliament because obviously, it's a highly political environment and our scope of influence is a little bit different. Last February, our staff filed a complaint to the Canada Labour Code, and this ironically has helped us, make progress on those things that we weren't able to accomplish before. And now I'm pleased to say that interpreters working for the Bureau are required to interrupt a service when participants are not using one of the approved microphones. And the list is based on the ISO standards. So we've really tried to streamline the equipment that participants are using. We're also working on internet connection. So currently our partners, the House of Commons and the Senate, are sending those microphones to participants. This has had a great, impact on the quality of the sound, and also has diminished the variability of the different types of sounds that we would get. And they're doing pre-tests with the witnesses. Then they're doing tests with the interpreters. So this is great progress. As I said, we were able to test the frequency range, sound pressure levels, and so we were able to close the complaints. But I'm not going to say that our work is done. We still have a lot of work to do. We've put together training for the interpreters on hearing health specifically, so that they know how to better protect themselves, especially when they're not working as well. Trying to rest their ears. My time is up. I'm almost done. We've created some protocols to help them know when to help them know if participants are using the right microphones, because the interpreters are not always aware. So we've really tried to streamline the process so that they know, when to interrupt if they have to. We also have a protocol now for hearing, or I should say for acoustic incidents rather, so that everybody knows what their roles and responsibilities are if that happens again. Hopefully we won't have to use it. The Translation Bureau created a director's position as well that is focused specifically on the health and safety of interpreters, so that we have one dedicated person trying to move these files ahead. And we have a very ambitious continuous improvement plan to try to continue to work with our clients and our interpreters in improving, sound quality and their working conditions in general. And we keep working with the National Research Council on those. So I think that sums up my presentation. I hope I was thorough and not too fast, and I hope you found this interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing the other presenters, and I'm free to answer questions at the end of the presentations if you have any. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Justine. This was wonderful. And in communication with you and with Matthew from the Bureau as well, I could see that you have been doing massive amounts of work to improve the working conditions of interpreters and doing the research that is necessary to keep moving forward the profession. So thank you so much. So we are going to